Welcome to the Anxious Creative Podcast. I have got a great episode for you today. We have got Celene Dupuis here from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. She is the owner of Revamp Salon. She's also a Redkin educator, the author of the Blonde Boss blog, and co-host of Make Your Mark class. This episode is going to be so good, so get ready to listen in for this great episode. I overthink, I overshare, and I overanalyze. So come explore with me as I chat about business, life, and relationships, all through the lens of an anxious creative. Okay, welcome Celene to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Dawn. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so what don't you do? This is an amazing list of things that you have going on. Tell me a little bit about yourself and who you are and how you came to be this kind of Jill of all trades.
Oh, geez. Well, I think that comes from being ADHD my whole life. So my name's Celene. I've been doing hair since 2003. And I've been a Redkin educator since 2005, actually.
Wow.
And yeah, and I think honestly, I grew up like it was kind of a joke in my family. I would drop out of high school and either be a stripper or I would be a hairdresser. So that was like, I have a supportive family, but that was like the joke growing up. So, the whole hair thing was seen in like negative light. And I just honestly, I thought it sounded like a fun industry to get started in. And then once I got into it, I realized that it can be really profitable and it can be like, it is such an amazing industry to be a part of. And my ADHD just kind of didn't let me just do one thing. So I started doing like a million different things.
Oh my goodness, I so relate on that. I'm always like, what's the next fun thing? As soon as something isn't fun feeling anymore, then I'm like, I know this could be great, but I don't want to finish it because I'm bored.
Totally.
So did you always know you wanted to be a hairstylist? If the joke was a stripper or a hairstylist?
Well, no, actually, I didn't really. I actually grew up, I was like a huge tomboy. Hated like wearing clothes and getting like, I just like wandered around naked as a kid. And like, through my high school years, I started really enjoying doing makeup. And I honestly thought I wanted to be a makeup artist. I wanted to be a teacher or possibly a makeup artist. And when I finished high school, I just didn't feel like university was for me. So I felt like I couldn't have a career as just a makeup artist. So I applied for an early childhood development course at a local college. And I applied to hair school and thought, well, you know what, I'll check out both, see what the universe throws in my lap. And maybe I could, do hair and makeup and a bunch of different things and see what happens. So.
Oh, we have such similar stories because I was told not to become a hairstylist because it wasn't a way I could support myself.
Right.
And then there was nothing at university that interested me, but I appeased my parents by taking a couple classes. I thought, I'll become a teacher because like I like kids. And then I just went to hair school just cause I like applied, and I think I handwrote my essay to get in, like with like pencil and paper. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in Saskatoon. It was called Marka College back then, but now it's MC College everywhere. So yeah, that's
the same school.
Yeah. I think if you're a prairie girl, I think that's, there's not a lot of choice. There was 2 hair schools at the time in Saskatoon. Now there's currently only one. Yeah. So I'm sure Calgary, you have a few more choices, but.
Yeah. I remember because in Saskatoon, it was like the rival of like Marka and Marvell across the street.
Right across the street from each other. Yeah.
Well, since we're like, this is very real time happening right now. Those that are listening in or watching in on YouTube, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, which has very much disrupted our industry. It's closed down our salons. It's closed, not even just our industry, but the world in general. And I was talking with you a little bit about like, it's a collective trauma that we're all going through. And trauma is something that you've gone through in your personal life quite a bit. And I was curious, would you share a little bit more about what are some of the things you've learned through trauma in your life and share, if you want to share about trauma and what you've learned and how you've been able to move through it, and have those things helped you with this current situation that we're going through with COVID-19.
Yeah, like I think first off, everybody obviously deals with trauma differently. Their response to trauma is going to be very different. And so these are, of course, my opinions on what worked for me, but it might not work for you. But, you know, in my life, I grew up in a family. I had two sisters, an older sister and a younger sister. And when I was 18, my younger sister, she was 16 at the time, she was killed by a drunk driver in a car accident. And that kind of started off like growing up. People from the outside would think, you know, we had the perfect family. My dad was a business owner and worked very hard. And, you know, we had all my sisters and I, we were all musical, and, you know, we just had like a seemingly like really normal looking, you know, dream family. And so when my sister passed away, that kind of kicked off like obviously a series of events that, you know, life isn't perfect. And it was a very, at a young age, a difficult thing to process. Right. But, kind of working through it, like a couple years after that, my dad actually passed away from brain cancer. And our family kind of navigated through that whole thing. And
within 2 years of your sister passing. Oh, we're breaking up.
We had a little lag there.
Oh yeah. I was like, oh no, the internet.
Sorry. What was that, Dawn?
No, I was saying, so only within 2 years after your sister passed, your dad passed.
Well, my sister passed in 2001. My dad passed in 2006, I think, or somewhere in there. So
very quickly.
Yeah, like it seemed quick. Between the two events, my mom actually had a heart attack as well. She has a heart disease. So that was kind of smack in the middle. And then about 3 years ago, my husband was in an ATV accident that left him a paraplegic. So we've kind of been navigating. We had a 2-year-old business at the time, and we've been kind of navigating that road. And I guess in short, I mean, what I've learned from it is that, first of all, everyone deals with trauma differently. But in times of uncertainty, like when, you know, things are real, like shitty in life, I often think that, you know, true character, how people respond often comes out in that. And sometimes for some people that's not super positive. Like not everybody, you know, picks himself up and handles it really well, which is okay. But I think that, you know, you can see, watching this global pandemic, you can see different responses from different businesses and different people. And some people really handle themselves with integrity, and other people, I wrote a blog about it, and I compare it to like, if you ever watch like Armageddon movies, zombie movies, apocalypse movies, there's always like two characters that come out of that. There's like, you know, when the world blows up and ends, there's like the people who end up being like leaders in their community. I'm thinking of like Walking Dead. They're like setting up hospitals and helping people collect food. And then there's people who are like buying all the guns and creating these like gangs, and they don't trust anybody. And I feel like those personality types, you know, you can get cynical and stop trusting people. Or you can be one that like leans in, opens yourself up, and lends yourself to like helping people.
Yeah.
You kind of can choose, I guess. I think it really comes down to choice, which way you decide to go.
And so when you first, I'm just going back to that first moment, like when your sister was killed by a drunk driver, had you had any knowledge or education around dealing with trauma before that?
No, I mean, not at all. At that time, like, I mean, I hadn't even, my grandparents had died when I was little, but literally we had like maybe an uncle or somebody pass away. We'd never dealt with trauma, and especially like a trauma like that. I mean, I was in the States going to school at the time. So, I mean, I was kind of left, you know, to navigate. I was 18, and, you know, that was the first time I had to fly by myself. And I mean, at this point, I remember sitting on the airplane, they had like the airplane phones, you know, you'd pick it up from the seat and like
Oh yeah.
dial out. And
I don't have those anymore. I forgot
no,
about those.
those are gone. But I mean, I was calling from the airplane, like to find out, you know, if my sister was still stable, and because she was in the hospital, and was brain dead. So it's like several days where they're doing tests. They have to, you know, decide, they have a series of tests to declare you clinically brain dead. And then 24 hours later, they repeat the test to see if you're legally brain dead. And at that time you choose, like, you know, to unplug all of the machines and stuff like that. So, I mean, just navigating all of that, it's not like, it wasn't just like a car accident where boom, she's gone. It was like 3 days of like, you know, our family was leading in groups of kids from her high school started showing up, like 20 at a time. Like people were just so devastated. She went to a large high school, and, you know, 16-year-old girl. So people were coming and they wanted to go into the hospital room and say goodbye. And, you know, she was unconscious, but, you know, my mom and myself and my sister, you know, we were leading these groups of teenagers in so they could have a few minutes. And it just was like a wild kind of thing to navigate.
Yeah. Do you, like, I just think like, and trauma is very different. I think back to like my first experience with trauma was going through a divorce, which is very different than death. But I look back and there's like periods of time that I just call like a black hole where I like don't have any memory. Do you have moments like that where you just like don't have any recollection of what happened, or space and time passing? Or is it very crystal clear?
Yeah, I think definitely I agree with you. I've also been through a divorce too. So I agree. It's like it's very similar to a death, but different. But yeah, there's these periods where, you don't really, it's, you know, like in a movie where you see somebody floating outside their body and it's like they're kind of observing, but they're not really part of the scene, if you will. So there are definitely those moments where, you know, you'll have a friend or somebody say, well, don't you remember when this happened? And you're kind of like, no, I don't. Like, can you walk me through that? Because I literally have no memory of it.
Yeah. And so was there, like, did you get counseling? Did you have a support system? What helped get you through those traumatic times in your life?
Well, I mean, I think that was probably the longest one for me to probably navigate through. I didn't have any counseling. And it was definitely like very different, you know, 18 years old and you're watching your mom fall apart and your family fall apart. And I think, you know, it probably took me a good 10 years to actually deal with the anger. And I think some interesting lessons, like immediately a family friend wrote a song for my sister. And this whole thing, my mom actually has a foundation called the Danae Song Foundation, and it's a nonprofit organization. She speaks all around North America to kids about drinking and driving and tells the story from start to finish. And it's very different from like, you know, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Like, it's very like, it's the entire story, like teenage boys leave the auditorium crying. Like, it's very moving. And
where can people find more about your mom's foundation? Sorry, just quickly.
She does have a website, and you know, it's terrible. I don't know the website address, but if you Google Danae Song or the Danae Song Foundation, she will totally be up, and you can find it through there. And I think the big thing is when this started, there was a lot of news around it. So I would get interviewed by news stations. And one of the things that I noticed was the stuff that always made the news was, so if they interviewed a family friend or one of my sister's friends, or the minute someone cried for the news anchors, that's what made the news. And so I was being interviewed one time, and the lady was, the news anchor was asking me questions about, she said, tell me about your sister. Like, what was she like? And I started to describe her, and I was talking about her in the present tense. And, you know, Danae was very this, or Danae was that. And she stopped me and she said, I notice you're speaking about her in the present tense. She said, you know, your sister has passed away and you're talking about her in the present tense. How does that make you feel? And it was like it was an audible moment in my life. Like in my brain, I was literally like, F you. And I felt emotion, and it was literally like, you know, moving up through my body. Like I felt like I was going to cry. And I had a moment where I made the choice in that interview that I was like, I am never going to give anyone the satisfaction of crying for you again. And I literally, it was like I turned a switch off, and I put up a wall. And I was like, because I was so angry that that's what they try and do. And I didn't realize at the time, but that wall caused me problems, and still is to this day. Like it was like a split decision to put that wall up, but it took me years to be able to, you know, break the wall down. And I'm still working on being able to show I speak a lot and very openly, but I'm not always able to be super vulnerable in situations. So,
especially in a situation where you feel like they're taking advantage of your emotional state, which is so awful.
Yeah, totally. And so I think we need to be like, my learning lesson through all of that was that many of us do put up walls. And sometimes it's a self-defense mechanism, right? Like maybe we're not in a place where we feel like we can deal with the emotion. We're not ready to go there yet. But if you put up walls and you make those choices, they can take years to break back through, and it can in turn be a lot more damaging than it would be just to feel the emotions through at that time.
Yeah. And you don't even, I don't know if you felt this way, but like, was it a conscious decision where you're like, I'm putting up a wall, but it was just like protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And then later on, you're like, oh, this is like a whole brick wall that I put up.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember for me, it was such a crystal clear, I made the choice, and literally in my head was like, I will never give them the satisfaction again. So to me, for years, I thought that, you know, crying was weakness. And that would have been like my worst nightmare, would be to like cry in front of a group of people, or to show, like, I didn't really even cry at my dad's funeral. Like I was emotional, but that's just not how I would handle. You know, some people have no problem breaking down and crying. In my mind, I don't look at other people as weak, but I would have looked at myself as weak.
Yeah.
For responding that way.
And that's the interesting thing with trauma, is that everyone deals with it in such different ways. And oftentimes I find people try to project like, you should be reacting this kind of way because this is how I would react. And they project their own way they deal with things onto other people. Yeah. And I was just saying, like, when this whole pandemic happened, we need to have so much more grace for each other because everyone deals with stress differently.
Yeah.
So when your husband was in his accident, this was was it 2 years ago, did you say?
It'll be 4 years this summer, actually.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So when you got the news, walk us through that. And because you've been through these other traumas, do you feel like you walked through that period of time differently or more equipped, or how was it different than the other traumas you'd experienced?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds weird, but when my husband was in the hospital, I actually said to one of my friends, like I said, I feel like my life was like leading me to like this moment. And I can't describe why I felt that way, but I mean, his accident happened at a friend's acreage, and I was there. I didn't see the accident happen, but his brother and myself were the first ones on the scene. And I mean, my husband knew right away he was paralyzed. He was conscious, and you know, he was pinned in the quad, and we were outside of the city. So we had to wait for firefighters to get there, and they had to, you know, cut, his legs were trapped around like the roll cage of the quad. It was a side by side. So they had to use Sawzall and like literally cut him out. And he knew that he had no feeling. He kept saying like, I can't feel my legs. And he knew right away. He told his friend that he said, like, I'm paralyzed, like you need to call 911. So he knew, but I think that even though he was saying that, like the rest of us didn't really, you know, like you just were in an accident, like you're not like, oh, he's paralyzed. But,
Right.
you know, getting him to the hospital and the trauma, the team, you know, did an assessment, and they did, I don't know if they did an x-ray or they did some kind of imaging. And then the doctor called me in and, you know, told us the news that like, you know, we're really sorry, but it looks like, you know, your husband's spinal cord is broke. He has a burst fracture, which means the vertebrae actually explodes. So
Oh, wow.
basically it was like his body, when the quad flipped, his body basically folded in half, and his L1 vertebrae, which is
Like
right around
backwards?
your, sorry, say that again.
Like backwards in half?
Forwards in half.
Forward.
So
Okay.
yeah, it was basically like it slammed his body together and
Ooh.
caused his L1, which is right around your groin region.
Okay.
It basically exploded. So it like explodes like a grenade and shoots a bunch of tiny bone fragments into your body. So his spinal cord was damaged, and you know, the doctor told us like, you know, we have to do some further testing, but this is probably the worst injury he said that he had ever seen. So even though my husband's injury is low, like he has a lot of mobility, he has all of his abdomen and his upper body. You know, getting news like that certainly, certainly kind of rocks your world.
Totally.
I do feel like the fact that I had been through other trauma, I feel like initially, like I had a moment of panic, which I typically do, but I'm built pretty well for handling high stress situations. I just kind of go into like, this is what we need to do. It's typically like survival mode, get all the things you need to do done. My focus was on, you know, my son, taking care of my husband, getting through surgery, you know, modifying our home so that my husband could eventually come home, and then selling and starting to look at building a new house because our home ultimately wouldn't have been accessible for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I had lots to do.
Yeah, no doubt.
Definitely. But I felt like, you know, my job with Redkin, I'd been doing that for a long time. And truthfully, I love it. I love being able to teach and help hairstylists earn a better living. But I felt like there was a higher purpose for me. And I'd been feeling it for a while. You and I, you know, met at Hair Love, and we even discussed that. Like, I just felt like, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing, but I think that I have more value to the earth than just teaching like a color placement. Not that that's not important, but I
Totally.
felt like there was a bigger calling. And when he had his accident, I just felt like, I don't know what this looks like or what this means, but maybe I need to use my voice, you know, as an advocate for accessibility, or I don't know what this looks like yet, but I feel like there's something out there for me that's larger. And so I felt like I was kind of being led into, I can't change what happened, but I can change how I respond to it.
I think that's
So,
amazing.
yeah.
I know, like, as cliche as it sounds, like I forget who said it. It's like life is 10% what happens to you, 90% how you react.
Yeah. And I truly do believe in that for sure.
Yeah. I love, because I think it was within the last year that you started an Instagram account about life in a wheelchair, and you were like, ask me anything. And you did some like really like, these are like kind of the questions that people ask. And has there ever been a time where people like the news anchor who like tried to make you cry? Do you feel like through this situation, are you able to weed out the kind of bullshit people a little bit more? Or does it ever cease to surprise you, like what people will come up and ask you about? Or things like that?
I mean, I think for the most part, because I've put it out there, and not everybody's like that. Like I will say, we have family members like that don't enjoy that we're doing this. I think they probably enjoy like the mission of it, but would prefer, like my husband's parents, I think they're very private. And so they're
Right.
kind of like, don't put our business on the internet. And like, that's okay. But like that's okay if they feel like that. But I know like my husband and I both feel like my husband is very introverted. And so he's not going to be one that's going to hop on and like tell you all of his feelings, but he wants to help other people that have been there, that were there for him to help him. So I think that because we put that out there and we're like, you know what, there is no stupid question. For the most part, I think like people always want to know with spinal cord injuries, like the main thing they want to know is like, how do you go to the bathroom? How do you have sex? And like, those are like the two things they really want to talk about, but often are too afraid to ask. So, right. And then there's the ones that aren't afraid to ask it and probably ask in the wrong times.
Yeah. Whoa.
And people have been pretty respectful for us. We've had a few times where like, people will be really stupid. Like sometimes, like my husband getting into his truck, he has a crane and it spins out and he hooks his wheelchair up to it and it like lifts his wheelchair up and puts it in the back of his truck.
Oh,
and
cool.
It's very cool. And sometimes like my husband will be getting into his truck and the crane is lifting up his wheelchair and like people will stand there. Like there was like 2 guys that were like filming it like on Snapchat. And like, we're pretty open. If they were like, hey, listen, man, that's so cool. Like, I have a friend that I'd love to send that to. Do you mind if I film it? It would be like, yeah, totally do it. But like, they're literally like treating us like we're a circus sideshow and like filming us. Like it's like stuff like that is just like, use your common sense, people. But
be respectful.
Yeah. And then other things like sometimes people without meaning to like do stupid things like, you know, maybe pull into like, you know, if you go into a parking lot and there's those areas that have the yellow lines painted across, they're usually right in front of a doorway or a ramp. People will have no parking space and they'll pull onto one of those. And it's like, well, you know what? That's actually like my husband can't get in the store when you pull into that because you're blocking the ramp. So yeah. I try to like, I don't get like uppity and like tell people off, but I'll just let them know like, hey, just FYI, like you probably don't realize what that's for. But you know, when you pull in there, like my husband physically can't get onto the sidewalk. So, you know, that's why those lines are there. And they're usually really embarrassed. And like, I try and just be gracious because it's just like people don't know. So we're trying to use our platform not for shame, but more for education.
I think that's amazing because people often, when shamed, people respond defensively. But when you can do it with kindness, I always say like kindness, compassion, empathy, people respond much, much better. Yeah. I love that. There was on CBC, there was You Can't Ask That series, and they were all about accessibility in wheelchair. And the one girl talked about bathrooms and people using the wheelchair accessible bathroom and how she's like, sometimes I just need to get in there and an able-bodied person's in it and her frustration with that. And I was like, oh, I've never even thought about that.
Yeah, I know it's a hard one. Even my husband and I talk about that because even people with disabilities will also have different opinions on like what the thing to do is. So I know like that's always my struggle. I go in and it's like there's nobody in the bathroom that has a physical disability and that stall is open and like there's a lineup. Do you use it? And so like honestly, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But if I do choose to use it, it's like, I'm going to be damn quick because you better believe if you come out and someone's there with a disability, like it's really, it's more embarrassing for you. So I think, if there's other stalls to pick, I'll always pick the other stall. But it's just like trying to make decisions that are more, it's just about being like inclusive to everybody so that everyone should have the opportunity to get out into the community and be able to, experience life as easily as possible.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I love that. Well, so now that we're in this global traumatic experience that is COVID-19, what would you say to everyone listening in on maybe this is their first time really dealing with trauma of any sort? What would be your words of wisdom through that you've learned and that have helped you personally?
Well, and I think one of the biggest things you hit the nail on the head was like the idea of like not shaming people. Obviously, businesses are the hot topic right now. I'll just throw it out there, is like the salons that are doing at-home kits, and then the salons and stylists that think that all people doing at-home kits are going to find a special place in hell. And it's Behind the Chair put out a great article that I just read today that shared the pros and cons. And I'm not going to get into that debate right now. But what I would say is, who cares? Like, if your team home kits, you know what, be team home kits. And you know what, I don't agree with everything everybody does, but it's not my job to like hop on the internet and be a troll and like give you my opinion. So I just feel like, don't shame people because they're choosing to do that right now. We're in a completely unprecedented time. So you're going to see other businesses make business decisions that you might not agree with. Whether or not it's, you know, some people feel like it's unethical, that remains to be seen. It depends on your area, first of all. It's perfectly legal to do so in my area. And in fact, Redkin USA has been selling home kits called Root Fusion for several years in the States. It was just discontinued there, but this isn't something new. What I would say is focus on how you can give your clients value, and whatever you decide, don't put your energy into like crusading against people that are, you know, making choices that are different from yours. I think it's negative, and it's energy that you need to really keep right now, because like trauma is exhausting, and you're wasting your energy fighting battles that in the end don't really matter and don't really affect you.
Totally. I just did a post earlier today where I was like, stop consuming, start observing, like stop letting everything in and letting it emotionally affect you. Yeah. Like fight it. Why fight against people? The amount of passive aggressive like posts and Instagram stories I see either towards people's clients or to other stylists, like we just need more love and acceptance.
I think so too. And I think going back to the shame thing, it's number one, not shaming people that are in our industry. And number two, not shaming our clients. You know, there's some really funny memes right now, but like a lot of people are really hitting the like, save your roots for me. And like, don't be guilting your clients into, and you know, that's why I started the root kits, was because my clients were texting and they were going to, whether I like it or not, they're going to go buy home color. So I can provide them with something to make them feel good and cover up their T-zone or their roots, or I can have to fix it when they get back. But what I'm not going to do is shame them for doing what they need to do to feel good right now. Like maybe you laid in bed all day yesterday and did nothing productive for you, if that's what you needed that day. Or maybe you needed to go buy a home kit and just do something to make yourself feel better. Like, let's be real. The color that's in a home kit, it like if you're thinking that professional quality hair color is so much different than drugstore hair color, you're fooling yourself. What's different is the professional that stands behind it. So they're not going to leave us. And if they do leave you, maybe you need to look at what you weren't providing to keep them with you in the first place.
Snap. Sorry.
That's where I would go with it. Because honestly, if you're using this time to connect with your clients, you're reaching out, you're making sure to keep the connection open, they're going to come back to you because you're going to build loyalty with them.
100%. Show them value, create a good experience, have something that's different. I always say, like, what's your point of difference? What is it about you that people come to you for besides the service you provide? Yeah, I love that.
I think that's a huge one.
Before we wrap this up, I want to acknowledge, because there are some people that are watching this on YouTube. You said you were coming on in quarantine mode in your robe, but it doesn't look like a robe. But let's just acknowledge Celene's beautiful robe. Yeah.
I'm wearing my fancy bathrobe today. I did makeup, so that was 1 point for the world, and I figured I didn't want to go all the way by getting dressed. So
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing so openly about the experiences you've had in life. I think the world needs to hear more of those stories to know that we're not alone in what we go through outside of this pandemic, but also just in, we don't always know what everyone's gone through and what makes us who we are. So thank you so much for being so open and honest and sharing so much.
Oh yeah. Thanks for having me on. And I think just the biggest thing I would always say is just remember, like you said, to be kind, to stay away from shaming people. And I think just really looking at the choices you make right now, because even though it's difficult, we still get to choose whether we approach the world with kindness and keeping all of this in perspective. Yes, it's difficult to be quarantined, but there's much more difficult things out there than having to stay home, right? There's people who have lost loved ones during the pandemic and can't gather to mourn the dead. There's people that, are really struggling. So the fact that, I'm bored because I have ADHD is not the worst problem. But that being said, honor that it's difficult for you, but always keep, in perspective on, what really is the most important thing and what matters right now.
Yeah, I love that. And knowing that not everybody shares everything about their life. So you only know what people tell you, and knowing that there's so much more story behind that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Where can people connect with you and find you more?
So I have a community on Facebook, so a Facebook group called Blonde Boss the Community. Also, my website, www.celenedupuis.com, hosts my blog. And then on Instagram, my name is Celene Dupuis. It's all E's, not spelled like Celine Dion. And I have a smart bio that will take you to my blog. It'll take you to the community on Facebook, and kind of all the different things that I share. So that'll take you everywhere you need to go.
Amazing. That's awesome. Well, you guys should definitely check her out because she's got so much knowledge and so entertaining as well. I love it. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Celene.
Thanks.
All right, you know the drill. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm switching it up. Why don't you reach out to Celene and let her know what a powerful story she's gotten. And as always, I would love for you to share this with your friends, like it, subscribe to it. We are on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe, like, share, and let's get this in the hands of more anxious creatives. All right, friend, we'll talk to you next week.